Note to self, don't ever choose that clip again, because it's like being in a church, that music. Oh my God, sorry everyone.
And sleepy.
And sleepy. Yeah.
Don't put people to sleep on a Friday afternoon, Ben.
No, not again. Anyway, welcome everyone.
Hello.
Hello. Before we get started, let's make sure that the world can see us. Gareth, are you there? So yes, we are. We are here. We are live, and welcome. This month for the Sheev live stream, we're doing a topic which is close to my heart. It's about training from the back of the room, but more importantly, training from the back of the Zoom. And we are going to be spending some time over the next hour or so exploring how training from the back of the room can really help elevate everyone's remote game. And thank you, Magali, for that affirmation that you can see and hear us. So, and awesome to have you here, Magali. So, my name is Ben Maynard, and I'm here to support Steph today.
Oh, hello, I'm Steph Ashmore.
Steph, who are you?
I am the head of Agile Delivery for Sheev and a delivery management coach and consultant.
Thank you very much. And
and who are you?
And who am I? Well, my name is Ben Maynard. I am the founder of Sheev. I'm a trainer from the back of the room trainer and have been for more years than I care to count, maybe 6 or 7. And I've had a blast post-COVID getting back into the classroom and teaching people training from the back of the room, as well as other stuff. And what I discovered, I suppose, and what kind of brings us here today is actually a lot of the ideas in training from the back of the room are very, very applicable to remote settings. And let's not go down a rabbit hole here and think that training from the back of the room is only for trainers. It absolutely isn't. I think the stuff we're going to be covering today, the concepts, the tools, the tips, they're actually very beneficial for anybody that wants people to remember what they've said.
Which is everyone, right?
Yeah.
Should be everyone.
Should be everyone. There are some moments where perhaps you don't want people to remember what you said. So don't apply the techniques in those situations.
Yeah, in the last TBR course that we did in person, lots of people were kind of asking, how do we take this online? How do we use this in remote settings? So yeah, that's where this kind of webinar was born, right?
Yeah, exactly. And so there is a virtual training for the back of the room course, which is great for people if you've haven't got much experience in using online tools. It really gives you a nice kind of base foundation in how to use some of the tools. What we're looking to do is to go beyond some of that basic stuff and actually give you some concepts and some tools and some tips, and also to have a conversation with you, albeit a remote conversation, to take your questions, your comments, your ideas, challenges and suggestions as we go through. We have no script for this. We have a very rough plan.
We don't have a plan.
We don't have a plan. No, we obviously have planned a little bit. But no, we're up for kind of taking this in whatever way that you all find most valuable. Now, sorry, Steph.
Did you want to start with connections?
Yeah. Well, I mean, let's start with an overall an introduction a little bit into what training from the back of the room is for those of you that perhaps haven't thought of this before, come across this at all. Training from the back of the room is a book and a training course, and I would say a school of thought devised by a lady named Sharon Bowman well over 10 years ago, I believe. Her book was reasonably successful until, I believe it was still a guy called Tobias Mayer from the Agile community, went to one of her courses and found the book and just thought, do you know what, there's a huge heap of stuff here, which is incredibly valuable for people in the Agile community. And he did an amazing job at opening up the Agile community's eyes to what Sharon Bowman had to offer in her book, Training from the Back of the Room, but also in some of her other fantastic books. Now, the general hypothesis and the approach to Sharon's work has always been, let's find ways to educate people, which works with how the brain works rather than being agnostic to it. So the way that we've taught historically is much like a live stream such as this. It's about a broadcast. And we sit in a classroom, we sit in rows, and we have somebody broadcast information at us. And there's no research which shows that that works with the brain. What we can hope at best is it's agnostic. But as our understanding of cognitive neuroscience has improved and we have more and more ideas around kind of what works for the brain and what doesn't, what Sharon was able to do was come up with a instructional design template and various tools and techniques which are proven to work with how the brain works rather than being agnostic to it. And we'll delve into some of those aspects. But needless to say, training from the back of the room is an interactive, engaging way to bring everybody in the room, or virtual or in person, along on that learning journey and leave them with a really memorable experience that they're easily able to recall.
Mm.
And the main design element of training from the back of the room is something called the 4 C's. So if you would imagine 4 quadrants, surprisingly, there's 1 C in each quadrant. And these C's are a journey. So we start with connections, and then we introduce new concepts. Then we talk about concrete practice, which is actually putting these new concepts into practice. And then we conclude it. And this can be for an overall training course. It could be for a meeting. It could be for a 10-minute section of a meeting. And we're going to be explaining what each of these different sections means. Now, as Steph mentioned a minute ago, we're going to be starting with connections, because connections is the most important part. So, Steph, when we say connections, what is it we are specifically talking about?
We're talking about connections to each other, to people in the room, people on the training course, connections to the topic, what we're trying to learn about, or what we are trying to get across in the meeting. And I think what's key actually for TBR is, like you said initially, it's not just about training. I think there's a lot of TBR concepts that you could take into lots of different settings, and particularly connecting to each other, right? We talk a lot in organizations about psychological safety. Yet I question how many people actually know how to create a psychologically safe environment. And I think working on connections and building in connections activities is a key way to do that, to create psychologically safe environments where people feel comfortable raising their hand and asking a question in the meeting, or they feel comfortable just asking for clarification, right? Rather than having silence throughout the call and just having one person speak the entire time because no one feels comfortable enough to say anything.
And we'll cover silence later. There's a couple of things which I suppose we're going to be kind of delving into after connections, which is, how to get people to turn their cameras on, or what do you do if there's silence when you ask a question. We'll come into those. But Steph, something you said, which I think is really, really important, which is when we talk about connections, we're talking about connecting people to each other, but also to the topic. What we're not talking about with connections is cheesy icebreakers where people are put on the spot and asked to share, what's your favorite number 1 single, or say something about yourself which will surprise people. People, they hate things. Personally, I hate them. The nice thing about connections is we're saying when we begin a meeting, when we begin a workshop, when we begin some training, the very first thing we should do before we introduce ourselves, before we do anything else, is get people to connect to each other by connecting to the topic. So this could mean having people answer a question. But how we do that is something we can explore. So Steph, if we're in a remote environment and we've got, let's keep it. Do you want the easy one or the hard one? Which scenario would you like?
Hard.
So you've got 16 people
Mm-hmm.
on a training, remote training or remote workshop or remote meeting, and you're on Zoom because you tried Teams and it's shit and it didn't work. So you went to Zoom, and so you're on Zoom. You've got 16 little faces up there, and you want to get them connecting to each other and connecting to the topic. How do you do that using a remote tool?
We actually have done this on one of our training courses. So we always start a new learning objective in a course with a section on what do you already know about this topic? have you ever used this topic before? I think I did one recently on definition of done, and we were talking about like, have you experienced the definition of done before? What was your first experience of it? Share that with somebody else, whether it's right or wrong or not. Doesn't really matter at this point, because we're just building connections to each other and to the topic at hand. So giving people the space to be able to answer that question, whether it's in breakout rooms or if they're comfortable doing so in front of the entire group. Yeah, that is how we have done that in the past.
Awesome. So what we're saying there is you've got an option whether you can go around the whole 16 people one by one, and then have them take it in turns, which is something that we do. And as kind of, and I think as awful as that may sound or feel, actually, what we find is that we do that style at the beginning of most days of our courses.
Yeah.
And what we find is on the first day, it takes people a little bit of time to warm up, but we make sure that the question is easy. We make sure it's something that everyone can answer. So it could be, what's your opinion of coaching, or what's your opinion of agile coaching, or name something you think is one of the worst traits of an agile coach, or one of the best traits of an agile coach, as an example. So I think it's just easy for people to answer in that context of, say, an agile coaching workshop or training environment.
Yeah.
So we do that. Going around each person gives everyone an opportunity to use their voice. And the other option you said was to put people in breakout rooms for that.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to say, when you've got a few people in the group who are comfortable talking, answering a question, speaking up, it makes a huge difference to letting other people who might be a little bit quieter, might be less comfortable speaking out. Those people are going to be your like charge ahead people. They're the ones that you want to get talking so they can show everybody else how comfortable it can be. And I think we've done that a few times on courses where you will say something ridiculous and allow everybody to know that it's okay to say something stupid.
I didn't do that on purpose, though, Steph.
Yeah, no, obviously.
No, I think so. Let's take this out into some tips. So one, I think that in remote environments, it's harder to create psychological safety at times. So don't be afraid of letting everyone have their turn and speaking. And I know that may sound like what I think is sometimes referred to as a creeping death. If you get everyone being able to use their voice in that environment, actually, do you know what? It helps people build connection more easily. And once they've used their voice, they're more likely to use it again. We found from our experience. What you can do with some of these connections activities, if you did want to deviate a little bit from training from the back of the room, is to have people say where they're from geographically, or even in Zoom. And this is something which actually we find quite nice when you start the workshop or you start the event and people are still coming in before that connections activity, ask everyone to update their Zoom name or their name in Teams to give their geographic location. So then people can see, I'm in the same part of the world as you. Oh, my cousin lives in Norway. Oh, you live in Copenhagen. That's really fascinating. Me and my brother-in-law used to live in Copenhagen. And what you find is actually just by doing this simple little thing about saying their geographic location helps people begin to find those connections naturally. So that's the first tip. You don't, in that initial period of time, don't be afraid to get people to put something like a geographic location in their name in Zoom or Teams to allow people to connect.
Yeah, I think outside of a training environment, right? A concept from TBR would be something like 3 before me, say. So if you're facilitating a meeting, you're taking a call, you're doing, I don't know, road mapping session or planning, and you get a question from the team, which might not necessarily have just one correct answer, take answers from other people in the group first. If you're the CTO or you're the leader in that group, people will expect the answer from you. And they may not feel comfortable speaking up, but as soon as you set that precedent that it's okay for, like, you want to hear people's answers, not only does that help create the psychological safe environment, but it's going to give you more perspective, better answers, and free people up to speak as well.
Awesome. Great tip. Free before me was the name of that technique.
Yeah, I think that's what it's called.
Yeah, that sounds about right. So let's say, we've got people in, maybe they've updated their names and we're getting ready for our connections activities. Let's say that we have then decided to put people into breakout rooms for this to answer a particular question. When you're putting people into breakout rooms, don't be afraid of asking someone to designate themselves as a facilitator or at least a timekeeper. Because what we find is when connections goes well, when any online activity goes well, the time never feels like the time. One of the most common things I hear back when we're doing things remotely is that we give people 5 minutes and it did not feel like 5 minutes at all. People wanted more time. So time has a habit of passing very quickly. And so one thing we can recommend to do, in particular in remote environments, is do make it clear that one person of the group should be a facilitator / timekeeper to help keep the conversation moving forward. Now, one other option you have then is that when you put people into breakout rooms, initially, you're doing a connections activity, randomly assigning the people in those breakout rooms can be quite nice, especially if you have a wide range of people that maybe don't know each other, various different organizations or different teams. Actually making the random cohorts, these random collections can be very useful. Now, as time proceeds through your online training, one of the things that we find much easier when doing things remotely when it comes to designing those groups, let's say you're in the middle of a workshop and there's going to be a group activity, is that what you're able to do is to begin to design who is in which breakout room. So if you see that there's some particularly good chemistry, or you feel that two people always end up being stuck together, then we have the opportunity as facilitators to decide how those rooms will be formed. So don't ever feel like you can't get feedback from the group or decide perhaps how to experiment with how those remote groups are structured.
Also, don't assume that people who work together are necessarily friends or have good connections. People might gravitate towards people that they like at work, which is great maybe initially, but it can also, it's going to stop them potentially from making connections with other people, and learning from other people, right? If you're in a setting where you're in, a training setting with multiple organizations, not just in your own, then you probably have a better chance of learning something new from someone outside of your organization. So I think we've done this before, where on the second day we kind of ask people to switch seats, or having something where you go and meet somebody from another table in an in-person training environment. So go and introduce yourself, go and ask them a question about the topic, go and ask them what they learn about that previous topic, to build that connection back with each other and to the topic again.
And I think it's easy to think that in a remote environment, it's harder to do those types of things. But actually, there's a great technique called promiscuous pairing, which you can use in a remote environment very easily, where you're just creating breakout rooms for two people. And you put a timer on the breakout rooms of, say, 3 minutes, and you give them some questions to answer. And then you just rotate around and you randomly recreate all the breakout rooms until everyone's had a chance to chat with everybody. So that there are ways that you can force some of those connections when working in a remote environment. And I think this is where, before we talked about connections in the very beginning of a training environment, or a workshop environment when working remotely, is please do explore having a co-facilitator. Because when working remotely, there's a huge amount of opportunity that arises, but some of it takes a certain level of technical competence or context switching to get the breakout room set up, or to create a new experiment exercise in Miro. So having a co-facilitator can really help you, give you the bandwidth to either do the things that are really going to elevate the remote game, or give you the opportunity to focus on delivering and facilitating the content whilst the other person is finding ways to up your remote game.
It also stops the monotonous drone of one person talking all the time and hearing the same person's voice all the time, which I think there's also the concept of trumps in training from the back of the room, which we haven't gone through at all. But is it different trumps same?
Yeah.
Where switch things up, make things a little bit different. is always going to bring people's attention back to where you want it to be. And then just to kind of talk on the previous point you made about, putting pairs into groups, putting pairs into breakout rooms, linking that then with, okay, you've had a conversation. Can you, did Ben disappear? I don't know whether Ben disappeared, but
I did, but I was making it so that everyone could see you.
Oh, right.
Rather than watching me listening to you.
So I was going to say, when you're in a breakout room doing an activity with a pair, you could then link that with a teach back exercise to have people come back into the main group and share what they've learned. So not only then do you get the opportunity to connect with somebody, connect with a topic, but you're then bringing in the concrete practice element of the 4 C's by then teaching other people about what you've just learned. We're probably over 10 minutes in as well, so we should mention our 10-minute rule.
Yes.
And you're now black and white.
Yeah, I know. Look at that, the joys. Yeah, well, I'll fix that. I'll stay black and white for now. Just add a little bit of...
that could be the novel change, just to keep people engaged and interested.
This is it. Now, I was actually going to arrange something like this, but this is a happy accident. So there are some... So we're talking about connections, and connections are really important. We've spoke about the importance of connecting to each other. Russell, as you said, it's important to get people thinking and not worrying. And actually, when people enter into a training environment, particularly a remote one, it can be quite a lonely experience. You're in your room. Maybe you could got your kids in the background, or the bin vans going up the road, or there's some other noise going on, and it's hard to really get into that zone. Now, one of the things that we will then struggle with, I think, in that remote environment is you want to get people engaged, but how do you do that? And when people start worrying and they feel anxious and they don't want to engage, one of the nice things we can do in person is get people walking around. When we're doing a connections activity in a room, we can ask people to stand up and we can get people to walk around and meet some other people. When we're not in that environment, though, when we are doing things remotely, we need to find novel and interesting ways of getting people to forget their worries. So one of the things we can begin to do, and this is another one of the 6 trumps. So 6 trumps are 6 brain science or learning principles that trump traditional learning. One of those is movement trump sitting. So one thing which I think people are often dubious about is in a remote environment, what can you do to get people moving? So asking people to stand up, asking people to stretch, asking people to draw, asking people to just stand at the back of the room and then come forward. All of it, anything which gets people moving to take their mind off of their worries and begin to then just relax, and you get everyone participating in it, is a great way just to help people kind of put their fears and that perceived threat to the back of their mind and actually kind of just get a little bit distracted so you can re-engage them in the content. And generally speaking, anything you can do which is a bit novel or a bit different, such as going black and white, can really help just jolt people a little bit and make them pay attention in a slightly different way.
I think the walk and talk one is such a good concept that can be taken in so many different scenarios, right? And we don't use it often enough, because when we do work remotely and we are working in remote teams, there is a lot of opportunity to be having conversations whilst walking and talking. But I think because organizations have a little bit of an adversity to it, we feel like we need to have people at their desks, or we feel like we have to be in front of our computers to be being productive, which is just not true. We can have fantastic conversations with colleagues. It could be a planning session, it could be a review session, it could be lots of things. Zoom, okay, maybe doesn't necessarily work very well if you're out and about walking, but there is a good old-fashioned telephone that works quite well. And then you can take that call whilst walking, and there's a lot of science behind walking and brain processing. So I think, that's one that should be utilized just so much more often than it is.
It's something that I have done, and 2 of my, I'll say friends, They can email me later and tell me I'm not their friend. Lucy Widdowson and Paul Barber, they're from some excellent ICF team coaches. They got us on WhatsApp group calls doing coaching reflection whilst going out for a walk.
Yeah.
And they said to us, okay, look, we've got a 25-minute activity where we want you to talk about your reflections on that practice team coaching we just did. What you want to do is, if you're happy with it, share it to us mobile numbers, or we'll put you in the Zoom breakout room on your phone and go for a walk, talk to each other.
Yeah.
Reflect on it. And I thought that's such a beautifully bold thing to suggest. But there is a huge amount of, I believe, cognitive benefit to moving around. And I noticed, Andy, you mentioned liberating structures, 1, 2, 4, all. 1, 2, 4, all is a fantastic exercise to use in a remote environment. Regardless at what point it is, it's a great way to kind of really have people ease into sharing their voice in that remote environment. So 1, 2, 4, all, for those of you that aren't familiar with it, this is about coming up with answering a question or generating some ideas on your own, and then doing it as a pair, and then doing it as a four, and then sharing that outcome of the group and trying to kind of coalesce onto a certain grouping of ideas. So it's a fantastic technique to use in a remote environment.
I've got lots of things that we could talk about and continue talking about on connections, but we're 20 minutes in.
I know. So what should we pick up? I mean, if anyone has any suggestions for a particular topic or challenge or problem they would like to have solved, and please do message us now. We are monitoring LinkedIn, so we can see those comments as they come in.
I would like to know what people's biggest problems are with engaging with people on either remote meetings, remote training, Zoom, preferably not technical questions.
Yeah, I would say that one of the most, I'm going to preempt a question here, preempt a problem. Cameras off. What do we do about cameras off, Steph? I mean, this is, we promised people some like wild and kind of varied tips, and I think maybe we've pushed the boundaries a little bit with some of our suggestions, but that's going to bring it right back down into the harsh reality. People won't turn their cameras on. What do we do?
Well, we've spoken about this before, and I think what we came up with was really being, and you can apply this to a lot of situations, right? Going in with a sense of curiosity. And lots of companies will mandate cameras on during meetings, which I think is probably going to be difficult for people in the first place, just because it's being mandated. But asking, send them a message, send them a DM. Hey, is there something I can do to make this easier for you? Can I adjust this situation so that you would be comfortable having your camera on? And I think, because a lot of the time we might assume that it's because they're not engaged or they're not bothered, but it could be something completely different. And until you ask the question, you're not going to know.
I think that's interesting, isn't it? Because I think people are scared to ask the question. I think that we too quickly judge people on their behaviors rather than their intent. And I think that when cameras are off, it's very easy to assume that people aren't paying attention. So what you're saying there, Steph, is a fantastic piece of advice. Is don't be afraid to ask people the question about why they have their cameras off. And I think if I think about how the way that, but particularly I train in a remote environment, is that when everyone's coming in, I will speak to every single person as they come in, and I will try and build some kind of connection with each of them, so that I'm just there being very unlike myself. I'm not a particularly chatty person in a normal social environment, but put me into a remote setting, then, or a training setting, particularly a remote setting. But as people are coming in, I'll say hello. I'll make a comment. I'll pick something out in their background. I'll do my best to build a personal connection with each of those people, so that when a camera is off, when I ask the question, like just wondering, have you had your camera off quite a lot? So if you're okay, is there something I can do to help you feel more comfortable? Then actually what you find, because I've built a bit of a personal connection with them, even just a small personal connection, they're more willing to be open and honest with me. And I do really make a effort at the very beginning of any training and all the way through to say, if you need to have your camera off at times, then you need to have your camera off. All we ask is that if you have your camera off, that you up your engagement levels, your asking of questions, your answering of questions, your interruptions. If your camera's off, do interrupt me if you have a question. Because if your camera's on, I can see what's going on. And I can see if someone's looking pensive, like they want to ask a question, or someone's confused, and I can read the room and I can ask that question, which I think is one of the advantages of being remote versus being in a room sometimes, that you can see everyone in one place. And so I make it really clear, if your camera's off, then there's certain expectations. And if you can't meet those expectations, then I'm going to keep on asking you questions and finding ways to bring you in.
Making use of the chat features, making use of the reactions in Zoom, asking questions, like you said. That's probably to answer Gareth's question, how about getting people to focus and not do work whilst they're in a call? Get them engaged, like ask them a question. Is there an activity that they need to be doing? Is there something that they need to be doing to participate in the call? Would be the first one, because if they're just there to listen, if they're just there to take in the information, then can we get them moving? Like we said before, can we get them moving around to keep them engaged in the content? If all they are doing is listening, then can they be taking notes, like writing the note down? Classes as movement, because you're physically moving the pen across the paper, drawing a picture to take the notes. These are things that would stop people from not paying attention to what you're saying in the meeting.
So there's an interesting point here. So we've got a few points coming in here. One which is relevant to this conversation around cameras on, from Andy. And the conversation about cameras on should be one-on-one. We don't want to embarrass people or put people on the spot. And whilst I agree, I do agree with that, and I disagree with it at the same time. I think that sometimes you can put out the invitation for cameras to be on, and you can explain why you'd like cameras to be on, and you can help people understand where you're coming from with that. If somebody then comes up and says, I've got my camera off for reason X, I don't see any problem with engaging with that person if they've engaged you, if they've kind of picked up on something that you've asked or something that you've said, and we're having a brief conversation about it. As long as it's warm and it's friendly and you're doing it with good intent, then I don't see any reason why you can't have those conversations as part of the group. If it is somebody who is kind of consistently having their camera off, or they say something and you have a slight feeling that, okay, maybe there's something deeper going on here, then it's really wise, yes, to have that conversation one-on-one. If those people are in the same organization, sometimes maybe there's somebody on the team that can help. Maybe there's someone a little bit better. What John's, I've done this when training with a gentleman named John Spruce, and similarly with another gentleman named Ben Sage, is that there'll be people that we don't think are totally engaged, even with their cameras on. So we'll be messaging each other, and John will go and talk to someone, or I'll go and talk to someone one-on-one. And there have been times where one thing I have done is when we have breaks, so it's really important to keep frequent breaks, always go at least every hour to have a decent sized break. And I vary the times as well. So it's not always 10 minutes, so 10, 12, 13, 15. And we do it based upon the points of the day. Because if it's the same all the time, people switch off and they kind of get bad. They get bad at timekeeping, I found. Is that I'll give up the lunch break because somebody is struggling. And we would have chatted on Zoom, or they would have said to me, can I talk to you about something? And I would set up a private breakout room just for me and that person. And I'll give up the break to talk to that person and help understand where they're coming from. So as a remote trainer, I think one of the things which people think is great is, when it comes to the break time, I've got nothing to do. I don't have to socialize. I can just go and do my own thing. Actually, I would recommend that if you're training remotely, be prepared to give up your break times to talk to people one-on-one about their concerns or their issues and how you can optimize the training for them. Because one of the big things in training from the back of the room is something called the right to pass, which is a right to pass on any of the activities. And we always ask that if somebody wants to exercise their right to pass on an activity, that they talk to the trainer, they talk to the co-trainer, they let their group know. And if there's some way we can make the activity work better for them, then we'll absolutely try our hardest to do that. Now, the interesting thing is, in a remote environment, does that right to pass also then apply to having your camera on? And that's something which you, as a trainer, have to be comfortable in yourself with the decision that you make in regards to that. And Andy, take it. Having cameras on can be very difficult. I've had some incredibly engaged people and had some wonderful training experiences when with cameras off. I've had some brilliant coaching conversations on the telephone. We're not saying it's an absolute prerequisite, and there are many valid reasons why people wouldn't like their camera on. But the one thing that I have found consistently is, regardless of where people are coming from, if you can build consistently strong personal connections and you listen to people, we generally speaking very rarely have people who have their cameras off all of the time.
I want to take a minute because Thorsten has a great point on English not being everybody's first language, and that can be a really difficult situation for people to be in, especially if you're in a remote training environment where it's difficult to hear people as it is. One thing I did notice recently is Zoom now has a closed captions, I think, option. So you can actually turn on captions during meetings, which I'm actually quite hard of hearing. So I often have a transcriber running during calls as well to help, because I always have subtitles or I use captions, because in order for me to really actively listen to somebody, I need that additional help. So I find that particularly helpful. Somebody else might find it helpful. But also I think that comes down to people feeling safe, and that's the environment that people are working in, for people to feel comfortable speaking in English when it's not their first language. I think it comes down to environment and how you react to mistakes, with people really in that situation, helping people feel vulnerable. Yeah,
great, fantastic stuff. Thank you, and thank you for sharing.
That's right. We're at 38 minutes, so we still haven't moved on.
So let's see if we can let me pick up a few threads here. So when it comes to whatever language the people are there isn't their first language, closed captions, very useful tool. People get a lot of value from there. Surprisingly accurate. As the trainer or facilitator, do be aware of your pace and do be prepared to leave pauses. Also, when using Miro, we have nice written instructions, and user test the instructions as well as the activities. A good activity should be pretty simple. So card sorting, moving things into true or false or in certain orders, people can often understand that very quickly without the need for lots of verbal instruction. So make your activities, at least at the beginning, easy to understand, have clear instructions, and use a test this with people before you get there for the first time. Now, going back to
that as well, not just written instructions or not just verbal instructions. I've had experiences in training in the past where the instructions for an activity have been given verbally, and then participants have been put into breakout rooms where there wasn't a written instructions, and everyone's like, I've forgotten what I was supposed to do. Because 2 or 3 minutes of one person after you've been in a training course for 7 hours for the day is difficult, and you really have to work hard to keep that focus. So make it easy for people. Have it there visually written with diagrams. However you can make that cognitive load on people lesser, add that in.
One option you do have, this is a training from the back of the room classic, is something called the check for understanding, which is where you ask the room questions, true or false questions, effective, often true or false questions, or you ask them a question which you make a statement which is false and ask them to correct it. Now, if I was just to say, oh, well, just do that in a remote environment, that's pretty crap, because this is about how you tweak some of these things to work in a remote environment. So here's something for you to consider. There's a technique called a chat storm. That's a chat storm. And this is where you ask everybody to put the answer to a question into the chat window. And then on the count of 5, everyone simultaneously hits enter, return, whatever it may be, so that all of their responses show at the same time. I mean, we could try this now on LinkedIn, but on YouTube, I'm not sure because of a delay in our streaming platform. I'm not sure if it would have much of an effect. But I could ask a question. What was the first thing that Steph and I spoke about on the 4Cs map? Was it C1, C2, C3, or C4? Connections, concepts, concrete practice, or conclusions. And then everyone would write what they thought was the answer into the chat. And then on a count of three, like 1, 2, 3, everyone would simultaneously hit enter. And then we see everyone's responses at the same time. So doing this for instructions can be a really neat way to get people to, in a safe way, express actually what they thought the answer was. It's a very fun way to kind of check for understanding using something called a chat storm, and chat storms can be used for many different things. And just to kind of talk about the Gareth's comment there about getting people to focus. Like the best way to get focus is to get engagement. The best way to get engagement is keep things short, keep things novel, keep things varied. If you can get some emotion involved in some of those things as well, and make sure people are connecting. If you can begin to tick those boxes, then in a remote environment, you can really help to keep people engaged. So I often get asked the question, well, like, will this training work remotely? How will I know that people aren't going to be at the side of their desk doing something else? And my answer to that is simple: is that people aren't going to have time to be doing something else, because the way we structured it is it's a 3-minute activity, and then we come back, and then they're going to have to share what they did, and then there'll be another activity, and then there'll be a bit of me talking, and I'll be making sure everyone's paying attention, and then they need to listen to that, because the next activity, they need that information. And it's about keeping things snappy and keeping that thread running through to keep people engaged.
I think talking about engagement, we could move on to we could skip concepts slightly and go to concrete practice, since we're already
and so some people actually then they did contribute when we did the chat storm. That's beautiful to see. And Paul, just quickly answer your question: if you have right to pass the cameras, I would say yes. The goal is to have people feel comfortable enough to have them on, rather than not giving them the option to have them off because it isn't what you desire. So, Steph.
Yes.
What's next?
I can't remember what you just said, but it just made me think of, 42 minutes in and I've already lost. Active participation, though, right, is part of, if we're breaking down concrete practice. So we've gone through connections, we've introduced some new concepts to the people in the room, and now we want to make sure that they stick. It is not enough for you to do a demonstration and them to watch the demonstration. Everybody talks about how important it is. Oh, I learn by doing. I always learn by doing, and these are things that we know. You don't learn how to swim from reading a book. We want to be doing. We want to be physically partaking in the activity. So why, in a training scenario or in a knowledge imparting scenario, do we ever think that it's okay to not use that same principle? So yes, I think the first part of concrete practice would be active participation.
And concrete practice is the section when you're going to be going deep on some of these new concepts that you've teased in the connections piece. And it's really easy just to kind of get into Zoom, Teams, share your screen, go through some slides, and then have everyone subsequently fall asleep. Because slides, as awesome as they are, they're like Valium for the soul, like they send people to sleep. So I don't think any of the training we deliver has slides, generally speaking. And if there is a slide in anything I do, it's generally to show some kind of animation. So the challenge is, in a remote environment, when you're introducing new concepts, how do you keep people engaged in that? And one of the easiest hacks to do in a remote environment is the following. So ask people to make notes. Sounds silly, but in a remote environment, people often don't have note-taking materials nearby. So ask people to get a pen and paper and lay the expectation that they're going to be making notes as we go through. What you can do is create an area in a Miro board or a mural board with a number of questions which they answer as you go through the information you're sharing about a new concept, even if you are sharing slides.
Mm.
Giving everyone their own space in Miro with some questions which you've come up with, which you ask them to answer as you go through. And then when they answer the question, get them to send an emoji, get them to send some kind of reaction in the tool so that you can see that they're answering the question.
Yeah. And the great thing about things like reactions is as soon as one person does it, it's like a reaction storm. Like suddenly, I remember the agile coaching course from the beginning of this year, and I think by the end of the week, the connections on that course were so strong that some of the people still stay in touch now. And that was built from 4 days of training. But there was a really good point then that you had. I forgot. Oh, Miro. So if we're talking about taking TBR practices right into different settings, stop doing your meetings with slide decks would be a great start. Like you don't need to do a planning session or a sprint review or whatever it is. You don't need to do it on a slide deck. You could do it in Miro where people can join you and collaborate in there. You're doing a planning session, have people, like you said, take notes on Post-it notes, and create a section on the board for them to make their notes. Move around priorities together. And that way they're physically engaging with the content that you're trying to get them engaged with. Do you want to do a planning session and a road mapping session where the client can actually move around what their priority is? And then even you'll be able to see where they're interacting, right? If you're looking at their cursors, you'll be able to see if they're hovering over a particular thing and not saying it. And it gives you that then, oh, is this really important to you? Would you like to prioritize it? Rather than the sending me to sleep slide deck, please no more slides.
They're deaf to slides. I think that when we're talking about kind of monitoring people's engagement in Miro, you do have the option to watch people collaborators cursors. The issue with that option is it's quite resource intensive from a computational perspective. So if you're finding that actually Miro is going slow for you or for other people and collaborators cursors are on, be selective about when you use it. You want to know if someone's engaged in an activity. If you've got 5 breakout rooms set up, and let's say that you have gone through a new concept, you spent 2 or 3 minutes introducing something new, and you put them in a breakout room to answer some questions together, to really check their understanding of a new concept. Do a card sort. They're moving Post-it notes or images around in a Miro board. Turning on collaborators cursors gets you to see actually who's driving, who's not, or even have a rough idea. Especially if your Miro board's up into the breakout rooms, and then by getting that visual feedback, then what we'd really recommend is, and this is something which really annoys me when I find myself doing it, is that just because you're trading remotely doesn't mean when people are in a breakout room, you are on a break. That breakout room time is incredibly valuable for a number of reasons. One, to give you the opportunity to go in and see how everyone is doing. To really ask them questions, make sure they're happy. What I often do is just put something up like this, just saying I'm here. If you need me, please say my name. So I won't go and interrupt, but I will make sure that people know that I've changed my screen to that so people can see that. And I use a tool called OBS for that.
I think that was backwards, but I don't know. It looked
could have been, yeah, could have been.
But way to keep people engaged. Read this text backwards.
Yeah, no, exactly. That is a great idea, Steph. Good tip.
Collaboration, though, is, I think, an important point on not just when keeping people engaged, right? But we're talking about activities. We're talking about getting people into the topic. Now, gamifying your topic is probably a go-to way to do that, right? But what we want to avoid is creating too much competition, because we want the focus to be on collaboration. So we're focusing on building this thing together. It's old school spaghetti structures with marshmallows, right? There might be a prize at the end for the best team, but the focus really is on collaborating with your team. It's any activity in remote training. is working together. Even if you do have a facilitator in that room, one person keeping time or one person just making sure, rotate the facilitator around if you're keeping the same groups. Don't let the same person facilitate every time, because the loudest, most confident people will be getting the most out of that training, and the quieter people are going to remember less.
I think working in a remote fashion offers us more opportunities at times as well, because if you're in the moment and you think, oh, I think there's I've designed an activity like this, but I wonder if we did something like this, maybe that would be a fun activity for people to engage in. So when you have a co-facilitator, actually getting them to take the lead for a second whilst you quickly prototype something in Miro to then share with them to have a go at, it's a great in the moment thing. And what we find is that this is something that we don't get so easily in a physical environment, but we have a greater options when we're working remotely, is that you can be listening to conversations that people are having. You can be making notes. You can be putting out statements. And then you can take what they're saying and immediately turn that into activity in Miro, duplicate it for everyone, and then get them working with their own words. And I think the remote environment gives a huge amount of latitude for us to actually blend more relevant contextual information into our activities versus in the room. What you're stuck with is what you had printed or what people choose to write down themselves. When we're working in a remote environment, we have many more options. Now, Steph, we're rapidly running out of time. You're up for a challenge.
Why is it always me?
Well, because I'm always up for a challenge because I think of them. Ask me.
Ask you anything?
No, ask me if I'm up for a challenge.
Oh, are you up for a challenge, Ben?
No, hate challenges.
Oh, no.
Yeah, I'm up for a challenge.
Let's go.
Challenge.
What was it?
So it was on the podcast. Who did we do it with? I did it with Jenny and CP.
Oh, yeah.
And we said, got to the end, okay, running out of time. Let's go back and forth and just think of like some tips that we've spoken about or some new tips. How to make remote environments, training, workshops, whatever it may be, make them the most engaging. Let's see who...
No, let's chat storm it.
All right.
Let's see what everybody else can remember. So what's the one takeaway thing that you think you can implement in your next call, meeting, training session, sprint review, stand up, whatever it might be? What's the one thing that you can try? Give everyone a minute.
Yeah. Whilst everyone's doing that. I did try and add a comment in through LinkedIn, but LinkedIn wasn't playing fair for me. If you're looking for tools to make some of this work, we can recommend our Hearth slides. A great alternative to Mentimeter. Awesome company, great tool. Always looking to find ways to make remote more engaging. So do check out our Hearth slides. If you're really kind of technically minded, then you can always go for something called OBS. Which is more technically involved, but does enable you to do like these kind of funny transitions and turn yourself upside down and stuff like that if you really want to. So do please let us know. Let's check onto the wrong camera now. Look at that. You can switch between cameras as well.
And then obviously we've mentioned Miro or Miro. Still don't know how that is pronounced. We mentioned that one a lot.
Yeah. It's hero like Miro. As I understand it.
Hero like Miro. Okay, so shall we see what people came up with?
Okay, so we've got someone called Tabitha Young. Chat storm to confirm active listening is happening.
Absolutely.
Cheeky.
Are we going to get the answers from the questions? What's the one thing that you're taking away from this webinar that you can implement?
Yeah, that's it. So I can overlay them on here. Hold on, there we go.
Okay.
Oh no, not working. So chat storm. Tabitha says chat storm. Jane says chat storm.
We're going to 3, 2, 1 it. 3, 2, 1, go.
It's already happening. But Steph, right? So what's the most outlandish thing that you could suggest that people try when it comes to remote situations?
The most outlandish.
Yeah.
I think in training, it's going to be building like a real activity, I think. Something that gets people moving in Miro. It's maybe not that outlandish. It's not that outlandish to us, I think, but to a lot of people it is. Because I think a lot of people still do their training in slides, in bullet points. Don't be afraid to just make it a bit wacky. Like that's the novelty of it is going to land with people. I think, maybe just go with the flow. It's not that outlandish, I don't think, but a lot of people still don't do it. And I think in meetings in general for engagement, speak up. They stop letting people or stop having meetings where people don't need to engage. And if it's a meeting where someone doesn't need to actually say something, or they don't need to have their camera on, they don't need to be speaking, let them go out and take that call wherever they can, like get that movement in for them to help them engage. And then feedback at the end of the call. Do something at the end of the call that says, hey, what's your takeaway? Can you, I don't know, if you've got a Slack channel, can everyone put in the chat storm the one takeaway from this call that makes, that sits with them the most? They're not really outlandish though.
No.
Do you have an outlandish?
They're good. Well, okay, so here's one. The dying minutes. Make a list of everything you think you should be doing as a remote facilitator or trainer. So setting the time boxes for exercises, designing the exercises, thinking about what content needs to be delivered, deciding who's in which breakout room, all the things that you think as a trainer that you should absolutely be doing. And then decide out of that list, take 25% and give that opportunity to the learners to decide. So when I think one of the greatest things that we don't do often enough, how's that for a sentence? One of the greatest things we don't do often enough is give the learners the opportunity to say how long they think an activity will take. Like, let them decide how long something should take. Let them decide how to change the activity, and just let them be the trainers and drive their learning, rather than feel like it's all on you. Because I think in a remote environment, you can't read the room so well, and the more data you can get and the more feedback and the more it can be a conversation, the more engaged your learners will feel.
I think, as well, when we're talking about outlandish things, try and drop the ego a little bit. Like, you don't have to do a 10-minute introduction about all of your experience in your life at the beginning of a session. You don't have to do the summary. Don't do the summary. Let them do it. Let the people in your meeting summarize the important points for them, because what's important for them is what's important. It's not what's important for you.
And we are at time, but on that note, Steph, I just wanted to share one last training from the back of the room saying, which is learners will remember what they write down, not what you write down. So get them to summarize and get them to write stuff down. And we're at time. I wanted to say, first of all, thank you to everyone that's watched this live and for all of your amazing comments. And sorry, but we didn't get around to kind of mentioning everyone or give everyone's comments. But Andy, Paul, Jane, Laura, Tabitha, I'm being mean. Tabitha, thank you, Tabitha. And Gareth as well for getting in there, first of all. Thank you, everyone, for your comments and your feedback. It's been awesome. Do share this with people. We will be using this opportunity to share more information perhaps next month, if not January, or on facilitation. So do hang around for that. Be sure to follow us. And Steph, huge thanks to you for putting up with me and my lack of planning. You've been the star of the show.
On a daily basis.
It's so modest. Everyone, thank you.
Your lack of planning.
Oh, yeah, I'm just the best. Thank you, everyone, so much. It's been a pleasure. This has been Training from the Back of the Zoom. That is Steph Ashmore.
And that's Ben Maynard.
Oh, look at that. Love it. Thank you, everyone. Oh no, I can't stop the live stream. Oh, it's going to be on LinkedIn forever. Oh no. It's going to be on LinkedIn forever now. This is really embarrassing. Oh
Where's
shit.
the
Oh
leave
no.
button?
Oh no, where's the leave button? Oh, this is a training from the back of the Zoom. We should have told people make sure you know where the leave button is, because it's really